1. These two stories are based on the same malicious compliance, so why not tell them both? I used to work at a swimming pool when I was 16 and stayed there for a good long time. Since I was the youngest by a lot and almost the most flexible, I would cover anyone's shift at long or short notice. So one time I was supposed to cover a Sunday shift and was asked via mail, so I had proof of it and was a good month before. The thing is, they forgot to write it down on the schedule. Still, naive 16-year-old me went to work since I was asked to do so. I get there and I see that we are overstaffed and was not expected. Since I lived the closest and was not on the schedule, I got sent home after an hour. There goes my Sunday, where I said no plans because I had to work. So when I confront my employer about this, the one who mailed and makes the schedule, she just tells me happily that I wasn't needed anymore and needed to check the schedule. Though as a one-time gesture of goodwill, she will pay me for the hour I was there. In the same period, I was covering another shift for 6 weeks back-to-back. Through week 5 and 6, I was not written in the schedule, so when I asked if I was still needed, she only wrote me on one shift. I knew quite certain I was needed both because my coworker was on vacation, and it was a very short shift in the middle of the day. Nobody but me was stupid enough to cover that. So cue malicious compliance. I did not go to the one that was not on the schedule. I went somewhere else, and it turns out I got no reception. So when I came home, I saw multiple missed calls. When I called back, my employer was livid because I wasn't there, and I knew I should be, so I pointed out what she told me about the schedule being sacred, and she only adjusted the 1 week after I told her both missed my name. So I assumed that I wasn't needed. But as a gesture of goodwill, she only needed to pay me the last hour I wasn't there. The shift was a literal hour. I did this a few more times when that happened to me, which only made my employer more annoyed. Then came the time I sent her home. You see, I had a coworker whose shift that I already took over, and even was supposed to become mine because he got promoted. Only he went and got a leg injury, so he could not be in the pool with kids to teach them. So my boss decided on the week that she should give me the shift by law on contract, that he could try and work his old shift with her. Funny thing, I was still on the schedule that she always says is foolproof, even though more often than not it was full of mistakes. So I get there and they were already working my shift in another route. Since I had to combine it with my own, I did things in a different order, so I run into them quite late in the progress of it. She asked me why I was there since it wasn't my shift and stuff. I tell her it is, she gave it to me in writing and I was on the schedule. She said it was technically his still since it wasn't on my contract yet. It would be reverted to him now since he couldn't do his new job for at least 2 months. I told her that policy is whoever is on the schedule has the right to work, and she should go home and give my colleague sick leave. This is a law here, so I was not screwing my coworker. She met me halfway and let me do the shift with him. I did have to come to her office the next day, so I went, and naturally she was still mad, told me she wouldn't change my contract. I reminded her she had to, by law, she didn't care. I resigned on the spot. My contract stated I had to stay a month. I did, only working my own hours. The schedule was a complete mess and nobody was able to get any time off. My position stayed open for a year because nobody wanted to work 7 days a week spread over shifts of 2 to 3 hours max. 2. In early 2020, I was hired under the title Assistant Manager at a local automotive shop. We mainly sold tires and alloy wheels for passenger vehicles. The company owns several stores. I reported directly to my manager, who then reported to the owner of the company. Shortly after I was hired, I noticed the behavior of the manager was far from professional. He would constantly mock and berate me for being the new guy. I believe part of this was jealousy and insecurity on his part, as I ended up recording more sales under my name within the first few months. He would also knock off, work early, and start drinking beer while the rest of us continue to work. I remember when he found out that I participated in MMA training sessions after work, he tried to goad me into a fight for his own amusement. Clearly, this guy didn't like me, and I was starting to get the feeling that he was trying to get me to snap or lose my cool, and as a result, my employment. I became even more certain of that with what happened next. During the few months that I had worked there, I had noticed that our takings for the day and sales records did not match. I would often spend half an hour to an hour after work trying to figure out where the errors were coming from, whilst the manager would simply throw his hands in the air and exclaim that he had no idea how it was happening. The recurring issues seemed to be that her cash takings had been recorded incorrectly. There would sometimes be an excess amount of cash that didn't match up to what was recorded on our sales invoicing software. Other times there would be less. I was at the time an accountant student, studying towards my bachelor's degree. I was already suspicious of the cash being out each day. However, given how the manager had been treating me up to this point, I was concerned that my complaint would somehow be twisted to used against me, and boy was I right. Several weeks later, my manager took some time off. During this time, I managed a personal record in store sales, and also noticed something interesting. The cash was never out at the end of each shift. I reported this directly to the owner of the company, given I was acting manager during the time my manager was away. I was expected to report to the owner every day, and explained what had been occurring whilst the manager was there. In all honesty, I was hopeful that the owner would be having a word with the manager about the discrepancies. However, I was also weary, as I believed once the owner spoke to my manager that the manager will immediately know it was me who reported this. When the manager returned to work, he immediately approached me with a disgruntled look on his face. "I've spoken with the owner. You tried to blame me for the discrepancies. You should focus on doing your job properly, then this wouldn't happen." I was quite taken aback by how angry he was, though. I wasn't surprised that he twisted it and tried to place blame on me. Given his reaction, I'm even more suspicious at this point. He wants me to do my job properly, eh? Malicious compliance ensues. That same week, I go to work. I started paying attention to what customers were paying when they were dealing with my manager. Behind his back, I began examining all his sale transactions and invoices with a fine comb. As the days rolled by, I started to find evidence of his dishonesty. When it came to a few cash sales, my manager was doing the following. Example. 1. Would tell the customer the price is $200 if he pays cash. 2. Would discount the tire by $50 in the sale and invoicing software. 3. Would put the extra cash into the till and record a $150 cash sale. 4. Before we did cash up at the end of the day, he would sneakily pocket this extra cash whilst no one was around. Though he was very foolish, as he clearly couldn't remember the exact amount he had swindled. Hence why the cash would be up some days, didn't swindle enough, or the cash would be down, swindled too much. I took screenshots of the discounts he had been giving on sales and sent them to the business owner along with a report. A report with a detailed description of my findings. The report also showed that on all days he wasn't there for the cash count, there was no variance. When he was there, well, the owner was infuriated. This man had been his trusted employee for years. The owner was so infuriated, in fact, that he ordered my manager to do a mandatory drug test, pee in a cup style, on the same day he found out, and no surprises, he failed. Turns out the manager had quite the meth habit. This was most likely his sole motive for stealing cash, and the owner was beside himself. We operate machinery every day in this store, and so the thought of a manager walking around high as a kite wouldn't sit well with any health and safety professional. In fact, it could have landed the owner in serious legal trouble if any accident or injury occurred under this manager's watch. The manager was terminated immediately for violation of his contract, and was later taken to court by the owner in an attempt to recover the stolen funds. Safe to say, I was promoted to store manager position shortly after his termination. 3. Background. This story takes place in Australia back in 2011. I'm American, but I was in Australia at the time on a working holiday visa. Considered a backpacker, the idea was I would work to supplement my travel expenses. Prior to this story, I spent several months working as a server at a restaurant in Sydney. After saving some money, I was able to travel the country for a couple of months, before eventually ending up in Cairns where I planned to replenish my funds. I found the hospitality industry the easiest to work in because I had serving experience and it paid well. You don't get many tips in Australia, but the hourly wage was around $18 an hour plus at the time, depending on which state you were in. In Australia, it's not uncommon for the restaurant to have you come in for a trial before they hire you. It's usually just a couple of hours to see if you can handle waiting tables, or that you didn't lie about prior experience. Technically, you're supposed to be paid during a trial, but that doesn't always happen. The first trial I did in Sydney was only for 1.5 hours, and they provided the work attire. I didn't get paid, but felt for such a short period of time it was no skin off my back. I did another trial in Sydney at a different restaurant and ended up getting paid for it on my first paycheck after they hired me. This story. When I arrived in Cairns, I was down to my last $200. I needed to find a job immediately. I walked around with copies of my resume, dropping them off at different restaurants. There was a nice little restaurant on the water where I spoke to the owner, Susan. I made it explicitly clear that I was only looking for a serving job. Susan and I agreed that I would come in the following day at 6 p.m. for a trial. I needed to wear a solid white button-down shirt and black pants. Having lived out of a backpack for the past couple of months, I didn't have these, so I spent $60 on the required clothing just to attend the trial. Now, the restaurant was pretty small, maybe 12 tables total. When I arrived, it was just Susan and 2 female servers. She immediately tells me to grab an apron and man the bar. I told her I thought this was a trial for a server position and that I had 0 bartending experience. I couldn't even make a simple cocktail, let alone man the bar by myself. She was having none of it. Reluctantly, I agreed to try in the hopes that after seeing how bad I was, she would give me some tables. Needless to say, it was a disaster. Other than pouring beer and wine, I was useless. One of the female servers kept having to take time away from her tables to make the drinks. It turns out the server that was helping me had several years of bartending experience. But Susan wouldn't let her bartend because it looks better to have a man behind the bar. Meanwhile, Susan herself never lifted a finger. She spent the whole night at one of the tables drinking wine with 2 of her friends. Around 9 p.m., Susan announces she's leaving. I ask her if that concludes the trial. She told me no, that I should stick around until close and we'd talk tomorrow. At this point, I knew the whole trial was bullshit. Her normal bartender had the night off and she just needed someone to fill in for the night. Even so, I ended up staying until 11 p.m. helping the 2 servers with the closing duties. I felt bad leaving them short-handed. It wasn't their fault after all. During that time, I learned what type of person Susan was. One of the servers told me Susan once took money out of the tip jar to pay a check that a table had skipped out on. I decided then that Susan wasn't getting any free labor out of me. I wasn't going to spend 5 hours of my time and $60 out of pocket on clothing to help her. The next day, Susan called, and surprise, I didn't get the job. Oh. I told her that's fine. Just let me know how I go about getting paid for the trial. She says, we don't pay for trials. I nicely told her that she was legally obligated to pay me for my time, and if she didn't, I would be forced to file a claim with the Fair Work Ombudsman. Her response was, do what you gotta do. So I did. I called the Fair Work Ombudsman, who confirmed that yes, I was entitled to 5 hours compensation at the minimum wage of $18 an hour. I first had to write a letter to Susan asking for the money. If she still didn't comply after 30 days, I would file a claim. I wrote a very courteous letter requesting $90 and sent it to Susan via certified mail. Of course, I never heard back, so after 30 days I filed the claim. I ended up finding a great serving job at a hotel restaurant and soon after forgot about the whole ordeal. Fast forward 6 months and I'm back in the US. I randomly get a call from an Australian number who happens to be the HR and accountant for Susan's restaurant. She asks me for some information in order to get me set up in their system as an employee so I can get paid. Within a couple of days, I had $134 transferred to my bank account. Not only did I get the $90, but I was paid some back-end things like the employer's superannuation contribution, similar to a 401k, and paid leave accrual. I don't know exactly what happened on her end, and with the fair ombudsman, but I imagine Susan was facing some hefty fines if she didn't pay me. In the end, it wasn't a lot of money, but rather the principle of the matter. I wasn't going to let Susan get away with free labor in my case, as I am sure she did with other trials. Hopefully, she thought twice next time her bartender took a night off. 4. Many years ago, think the early 2000s, I worked at a U.S. health insurance company. I'd worked my way through the grunt queues and was splitting my job time between being a patient advocate and a provider representative. Yeah, I know those two are often in conflict, but here begins the story. A local hospital had recently regenerated their contract with us. They were looking to double their pay schedule, and were one of the only hospitals in the area, so they had us over a barrel. But they were also notorious for screwing up their billing, so some new clauses were added to the new contract. Enter Jane, a billing agent from the hospital. She calls in with an issue, and I can tell this woman didn't have her coffee. You people screwed up a claim. Again. I don't know why you can't just do your jobs and pay us right. Well, let me take a look for you and see if I can find out what happened. Fine, but you better be fast. I know you guys like to make us wait, so we hang up and go away. She then proceeds to tell me the date and patient of the claim. I politely put her on hold and look it over, and I start to smile because, this is beautiful. Thank you for waiting. I see the claim denied as provider liable, which is obviously wrong, because we had the surgery authorized, and you people screwed up, so just fix it. As I was saying, this was denied as provider liable, while the patient was authorized for a rhinoplasty. Nose job, due to medical need. I see the claim was sent by you with a diagnosis showing it was cosmetic. Well, obviously it isn't. So just click your buttons and change that to the right one. I'm sorry, it's considered fraud for me or anyone here to alter the diagnosis you submitted. Also, you billed us on the same claim form for a breast augmentation, a boob job, liposuction, and a facelift, all with the same cosmetic indicators. Then I'll just resubmit it with a medical code, and it will deny as a duplicate. Then I'll pull it back and send in a new one. You can feel free to do that, but be advised that a copy of this claim and your call notation will be sent to the approvals team. Also, please review your new contract for billing guidelines. And just what is that supposed to mean? This claim denied as provider liable correctly, and according to your contract, you are not allowed to bill the patient. So a letter has been triggered to be sent to them, advising that the services on this claim were denied, and they are not responsible for the charges according to the provider contract. What? What do you mean? What am I supposed to do with this bill? I would suggest you work with your financial officers, as this will need to be a full write-off. Click. I then write up the letter for that patient, which definitely isn't a normal thing to do. It may not have been sent if I wasn't so cranky at being called incompetent. And you better believe I made sure everyone in provider services and medical approval reviewed every claim for that hospital with a fine-tooth comb, in case us people screwed up again. 5. Hello. My home country of Canada just happened to have an incident where Rogers, one of the big 3 telecommunications companies, accidentally cut off all telecommunications for 25% of Canada, as well as the point-of-sale systems for most businesses across the country. This reminded me of a malicious compliance incident that happened during my time working at a call center for a Canadian telecommunications company, and I thought I could share my story. This tale starts all the way back in 2013 and involves my time working at a call center at the fourth largest national cellular carrier. For a little bit of context about Canadian telecommunications, and specifically cell phone services, Canada is the second largest nation on Earth, by landmass, with one of the lowest population densities, and the federal government has some strict laws about foreign ownership of financing and telecommunications. As a result of this, cell phone plans are very expensive, and the only companies that offer service are already established large companies with the resources to purchase spectrum and set up infrastructure. My employer was a newcomer to the market and was trying to make a splash by offering lower price services on the recently auctioned off AWS spectrum. The expensive cell phone plans that were offered in Canada were a real hot button issue. Such a hot button issue that in the 2011 federal election, all of the major political parties campaigned with the promise to make services better and lower prices. I think even Bloc had a campaign promise too. The result of this election was that in 2013 the CRTC, Canadian Radio and Television Commission, revised a bunch of the laws that regulated cell phone providers, specifically cell phone contracts. The updated laws were called the CRTC Code of Conduct. The new wireless code made a bunch of changes, but the most important were that cell phone contracts were required to be written in plain English instead of legalese, and any service advertised as unlimited cannot have an overage charge by law. These new regulations were a very big deal at the time, and employees at the call center I worked at were required to sit through multiple training sessions and take quizzes and tests about how to make sure we knew and understood the new laws. When this was happening, I was working in the back office department in one of the call centers for this cellular carrier. The back office department serves several functions, but I had managed to find a niche in the department. I had become responsible for monitoring people's roaming usage when traveling outside of Canada and disconnected them before they got bill shock. At the time, it was not uncommon to find news stories of people coming home from a trip to having an $8,500 phone bill, and I was the sole person responsible for making sure that didn't happen. Also, I worked part-time 3 days a week. The supervisor at the back office department did not get along with me. He would constantly harass me. I was previously in the technical support department where he was the supervisor, where the harassment began. I eventually became frustrated by the way I was being treated and transferred away from technical support to back office so that I could escape from the abuse I was receiving. A couple of months after I transferred, he transferred too, and became my supervisor once again, and the abuse continued. I'm not sure what I did to this person to make this person treat me the way they did, but we had an antagonistic relationship for as long as he was my supervisor. So in 2014, my employer became the first carrier, to my knowledge, to offer unlimited USA roaming. You could pay $15 a month on top of your normal monthly plan and get unlimited roaming in the United States. They also had offered a trucker plan, $35 a month, total, that would have unlimited voice, SMS, and data anywhere in North America, and it was marketed directly to long-haul truckers. This add-on and plan were a pretty big deal, as other carriers were charging 2 to 5 megabits for data roaming. Doing a bit of research, Solo Mobile charges $6 per megabit for USA roaming to this day. To my mind, monitoring USA roaming is no longer a high priority, as I can't disconnect people that have this add-on or appropriate plan because it's against the law. I continue to monitor roaming usage, and every time I see a user with a massive amount of data usage, I go into their account to confirm the existence of the add-on or a plan that would allow for this roaming usage. Once confirmed, I move on to the next account. My focus quickly starts to be focused on people traveling in Europe, Asia, Africa. There are fewer people roaming in those locations, as Canada doesn't share a land border with them, and the data roaming rate is a lot more expensive, to the tune of $20 per megabit. This is going well for a couple of weeks until my supervisor comes up and asks why I'm not deactivating the accounts traveling in the United States anymore. I attempt to explain that I can't deactivate these customers as they have an appropriate plan or add-on, and if I were to do this, then the company would be in violation of the laws. We have a back and forth about this, and the discussion ends when he says something to the effect of, "Just shut up and do what I told you." Maybe he said, "Shut up and do your job." I just remember hearing "shut up." Alright, fine. If that's the way you want to do it, can you send me an email with those instructions, please? Normally I would work at my normal work pace, but that day specifically I was flying through accounts. I'm not sure how many people I deactivated. I was cutting people off left, right, and center. I went home that night and knew that there would be fallout. And I felt incredibly guilty for negatively affecting the honest customers that were caught in the crossfire of my supervisor's bullshit. Because I was part-time and only working 3 days a week, I wouldn't see the fallout for 4 more days. When I got back to work, the situation was apparently complete chaos. The entire department had spent 4 days that I was off trying to reactivate people, and they wouldn't be finished for a couple more days still. I heard rumors that some people, important people, had threatened lawsuits and all sorts of other shit as a result of being cut off when they had purchased plans advertised with unlimited data in the USA. The supervisor and manager tried to blame me, but I had the email and witnesses to our conversation to back me up. I don't know if the supervisor got in trouble over this incident. Nothing happened to me over it. I do know that he was eventually promoted to being the general manager of the call center, and subsequently fired years later when we brought in a union over the shitty working conditions. I do want to clarify before I go, I didn't disconnect people without their knowledge. The process was to call them, inform them of their roaming usage, the approximate charge that would appear on their next bill, and give them the opportunity to make a payment to continue roaming. Many people didn't make a payment because they thought I was trying to scam them. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 158. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you could please hit the like button before you go, thank you, I'd appreciate it. Right, let's see, I think I have a little shout out to do to the author of the last story there. They've got a game up on Steam called Hexes, and I will include a link next to Story 5, a little link there next to Story 5 that will take you to the Steam page. Reddit name is Takuzo, and you can find, well, let's have a look, let's see. Is that their developer name too? No, the developer name is Electri Inc. And you can find that game up on Steam. There is a demo right now and planned releases for sometime this year. Okay. And before we go, time for Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, what urban legend do you wish was true? That's kind of a tough one because these things are not generally positive, are they? They're generally nasty things with bad things happening or spooky, mysterious creatures lurking in the dark. Personally, I think it'd be quite cool if pretty much any of the ones that involve ghosts exist. I'm sure there's some that'd be quite awful you wouldn't want to hear about. But, you know, ghosts, cool. Let me know what you think in a comment below. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.